The world never saw Clarence Mitchell coming. For most of his 36 years, people looked past him, dismissed him as nothing more than a quiet janitor in a corporate tower of glass and steel. They didn't see the man who rose before dawn each day, who scrubbed floors beneath the gleaming shoes of men who barely noticed he existed. And they certainly didn't see the sharp mind beneath his humble demeanor, a mind that never forgot an insult or a slight. Clarence worked at Westbridge Financial for 12 years, a towering symbol of wealth that scraped the sky. He knew every corner of that building, every locked door, every whispered conversation. And no one paid him any attention. No one, except Martin Carlyle. Carlyle was the golden boy of Westbridge. Young, ruthless, and already perched on the board by 33. He wore his power like a second skin, flicking his perfectly tailored cufflinks whenever he wanted the world to know who was in charge. And he enjoyed nothing more than reminding Clarence exactly where he stood. "Mr. Spot, Mitchell," Carlyle sneered one evening as he strode through the marble lobby, briefcase swinging. "Unless you like mopping floors for a living, maybe pay attention next time." Clarence bit his tongue. He always did. But that night, as he pushed his mop across the floor, he caught the faintest slip of paper tucked under Carlyle's leather chair. A code. 5 digits, hastily scrawled. And with it, an idea took root. Westbridge was a fortress. Its executives bragged about their unbreakable systems, their cutting-edge security. But Clarence had spent 12 years watching. Learning. He knew that every fortress has a weak spot, and Martin Carlyle had just handed it to him. By day, Clarence mopped floors. But by night, he became a ghost in the system. He slipped into the janitor's closet where the staff Wi-Fi barely pinged the corporate firewall. The 5-digit code opened doors no janitor should have access to. Accounts. Passwords. The digital keys to Westbridge's most confidential secrets. And secrets, Clarence knew, had power. Months passed, and Carlyle barely noticed him. Why would he? But one morning, the golden boy arrived at work to find the wolves at his door. The SEC. The FBI. A flurry of investigators descending like vultures. Within hours, Westbridge Financial was in freefall. Embezzlement. Insider trading. Anonymous tips backed by ironclad evidence. Carlyle protested. He fought. But the proof was undeniable. His accounts traced back to offshore holdings, slush funds hidden behind shell companies. Every keystroke laid bare for the world to see. And through it all, Clarence watched from the shadows, unseen, as the empire Carlyle built crumbled beneath him. When the headlines broke, Carlyle was still in his glass office, blinds drawn against the chaos. He sat rigid in his leather chair, staring at the screen as his world burned. The phone on his desk buzzed. Anonymous message. For words, "Mr. Spot, Carlyle." He spun around, but the office was empty. Just a janitor's cart abandoned in the hallway. And Clarence? Clarence had already slipped out the back door, a free man for the first time in years. But the game wasn't over. Late that night, in a dim apartment across town, Clarence opened a fresh folder on his laptop. He wasn't done cleaning up Westbridge's mess. And someone else was next. The tables had turned, and for the first time, Clarence Mitchell wasn't going to be ignored. If you're new to True Crime series, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you the real stories, the cases that demand to be heard and the voices that deserve justice. This is a case you won't want to miss. And that changed everything. Clarence sat in his cramped apartment, the blackmail ledger spread across his kitchen table. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt coffee, his untouched cup sitting cold beside him. His hands trembled as he traced his brother Marcus's name scrawled across the yellowed page. Next to it, a payment of $25,000. "What the hell were you mixed up in, Marcus?" Clarence whispered, the weight of betrayal tightening in his chest. His brother had always been the golden boy, law-abiding, ambitious, the one who had kept Clarence on the straight and narrow when no one else would. If Marcus had dealings with Langston, it meant he was tangled in something dangerous. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're in too deep. Stop digging." Clarence's heart pounded against his ribs. He stood, glancing toward his window, half expecting to see shadowy figures lurking in the street below. Instead, the empty night stretched before him, but the chill creeping down his spine refused to fade. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find them. The next day, Clarence parked outside a modest brick house on the south side of town. It was Marcus's place, a far cry from the fancy penthouses the names in Langston's ledger could afford. His brother wasn't home, but Clarence still had a key. He hesitated only a moment before letting himself in. Inside, the house was immaculate, but something felt off. The framed photos on the mantel, the ones of them as kids, were missing. A pile of unopened mail sat on the counter. Marcus was always meticulous about his bills. Something wasn't right. Clarence moved to the bedroom. His heart stopped when he saw the shattered lamp on the floor and papers scattered across the desk. Someone else had been here, and they weren't looking for overdue bills. He sifted through the papers until he found a faded photograph tucked beneath a drawer. It was Marcus, years younger, standing next to a man Clarence recognized immediately. Jack Ruby. Clarence's breath hitched. His hands trembled as he flipped the photo over. Scrawled in faded ink were 4 words that made his blood run cold. It's bigger than Dallas. A floorboard creaked behind him. Clarence spun around, his pulse thundering in his ears, and froze. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes shadowed with secrets. You shouldn't be here, Clarence, Marcus said, his voice low and strained. You knew Ruby, Clarence choked out. What did you do? What have you gotten yourself into? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room and locked the door behind him. If you want the truth, he said grimly, you're not going to like what comes next. Clarence opened his mouth to speak, but a sharp knock at the front door silenced them both. 3 deliberate raps, echoing like gunshots through the quiet house. Marcus's face turned ashen. They found us. Clarence's blood ran cold. Who? Before Marcus could answer, the door splintered open. The front door crashed open. Marcus grabbed Clarence by the arm and yanked him toward the back of the house. Out the window, he hissed. Now. Clarence's legs trembled as he stumbled after his brother. Behind them, heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor. Whoever had come wasn't here to talk. They burst into the bedroom, and Marcus flung open the window. Go, he ordered. Clarence hesitated. I'm not leaving without answers. A gunshot rang out, splintering the doorframe. Marcus shoved Clarence through the window just as another shot whizzed past his head. Clarence landed hard in the overgrown backyard, pain jolting through his knees. Marcus followed a second later, slamming the window shut behind him. Run! Marcus barked, already bolting for the alley. They sprinted through the darkness, cutting across abandoned lots and side streets. Behind them, car doors slammed. Whoever they were still coming. Clarence's lungs burned as they ducked into an alley. Marcus flattened himself against the wall, panting. You shouldn't have come, he said hoarsely. I found your name in Langston's ledger, Clarence shot back. I need to know the truth. Marcus's expression darkened. The truth will get you killed. I don't care, Clarence snapped. You owe me. For a long moment, Marcus was silent. Then he nodded, his jaw tight. Fine. But if we do this, no turning back. Clarence swallowed hard. I'm in. They reached a rundown auto shop on the outskirts of town. Marcus led the way inside through a rusted side door. The smell of motor oil and dust filled the air. In the back, beneath a workbench, he pulled up a loose floorboard and retrieved a battered lockbox. What's in there? Clarence asked, his voice tense. Marcus unlocked it and pulled out a stack of faded documents. At the top was a letter, dated November 21, 1963, 2 days before Kennedy's assassination. Clarence's breath hitched. What is this? Proof, Marcus said quietly. Ruby wasn't acting alone. There were others, bigger players. Langston was just a middleman. But the real power? It goes beyond Dallas. Clarence scanned the letter. His blood ran cold at the signature at the bottom. HC. Who's HC? He demanded. Marcus hesitated. Howard Carter. Clarence's stomach dropped. The judge. The name was legendary. Howard Carter was a retired federal judge with deep political ties. If he was involved, the conspiracy reached the highest levels of power. Marcus nodded grimly. He orchestrated everything. Ruby was just his pawn. Clarence's mind raced. If Judge Carter was behind the cover-up, exposing him would shake the nation. But how could they bring down a man with that much influence? A loud clink echoed from the front of the shop. Someone was picking the lock. Marcus's eyes widened. They found us. Clarence shoved the documents into his jacket. We need to go. Before he could finish, the door burst open. 2 men in black suits stepped inside, guns raised. The world never saw Clarence Mitchell coming. For most of his 36 years, people looked past him, dismissed him as nothing more than a quiet janitor in a corporate tower of glass and steel. They didn't see the man who rose before dawn each day, who scrubbed floors beneath the gleaming shoes of men who barely noticed he existed. And they certainly didn't see the sharp mind beneath his humble demeanor, a mind that never forgot an insult or a slight. Clarence worked at Westbridge Financial for 12 years, a towering symbol of wealth that scraped the sky. He knew every corner of that building, every locked door, every whispered conversation. And no one paid him any attention. No one, except Martin Carlyle. Carlyle was the golden boy of Westbridge. Young, ruthless, and already perched on the board by 33. He wore his power like a second skin, flicking his perfectly tailored cufflinks whenever he wanted the world to know who was in charge. And he enjoyed nothing more than reminding Clarence exactly where he stood. "Mr. Spot, Mitchell," Carlyle sneered one evening as he strode through the marble lobby, briefcase swinging. "Unless you like mopping floors for a living, maybe pay attention next time." Clarence bit his tongue. He always did. But that night, as he pushed his mop across the floor, he caught the faintest slip of paper tucked under Carlyle's leather chair. A code. 5 digits, hastily scrawled. And with it, an idea took root. Westbridge was a fortress. Its executives bragged about their unbreakable systems, their cutting-edge security. But Clarence had spent 12 years watching. Learning. He knew that every fortress has a weak spot, and Martin Carlyle had just handed it to him. By day, Clarence mopped floors. But by night, he became a ghost in the system. He slipped into the janitor's closet where the staff Wi-Fi barely pinged the corporate firewall. The 5-digit code opened doors no janitor should have access to. Accounts. Passwords. The digital keys to Westbridge's most confidential secrets. And secrets, Clarence knew, had power. Months passed, and Carlyle barely noticed him. Why would he? But one morning, the golden boy arrived at work to find the wolves at his door. The SEC. The FBI. A flurry of investigators descending like vultures. Within hours, Westbridge Financial was in freefall. Embezzlement. Insider trading. Anonymous tips backed by ironclad evidence. Carlyle protested. He fought. But the proof was undeniable. His accounts traced back to offshore holdings, slush funds hidden behind shell companies. Every keystroke laid bare for the world to see. And through it all, Clarence watched from the shadows, unseen, as the empire Carlyle built crumbled beneath him. When the headlines broke, Carlyle was still in his glass office, blinds drawn against the chaos. He sat rigid in his leather chair, staring at the screen as his world burned. The phone on his desk buzzed. Anonymous message. For words, "Mr. Spot, Carlyle." He spun around, but the office was empty. Just the janitor's cart abandoned in the hallway. And Clarence? Clarence had already slipped out the back door, a free man for the first time in years. But the game wasn't over. Late that night, in a dim apartment across town, Clarence opened a fresh folder on his laptop. He wasn't done cleaning up Westbridge's mess. And someone else was next. The tables had turned, and for the first time, Clarence Mitchell wasn't going to be ignored. Clarence's next target wasn't a boardroom tyrant. It was the man behind the curtain. Arthur Langston, the CEO of Westbridge Financial, a man so insulated by wealth and influence that even whispers of wrongdoing never touched him. While Carlyle played the front-facing villain, Langston pulled the strings from a penthouse office no one entered without permission. Clarence knew the truth. Carlyle was a pawn. Langston was the king. By now, he had access to systems most people couldn't dream of breaching. But Langston was careful. Too careful. Encrypted messages, hidden servers, a private security team that never left his side. If Clarence wanted to bring him down, he needed something more than bank records. He needed proof Langston thought no one could ever touch. And then, one night, the proof came to him. While scrubbing through Westbridge's archived server logs, Clarence found an encrypted folder buried under layers of corporate jargon. The title, Asset Retention Protocol. It wasn't company policy. It was blackmail. Inside, Clarence uncovered a cache of video recordings. Private meetings. Backroom deals. Judges paid off to bury investigations. Politicians bought and sold. And at the center of it all? Arthur Langston, his face calm as he orchestrated every move. Clarence's heart pounded as he transferred the files to an external drive. This was bigger than Carlyle. Bigger than corporate greed. This was a man who believed he was untouchable. The next morning, Arthur Langston received a package on his desk. A sleek black envelope containing a single USB drive. No note. No explanation. An hour later, his personal line buzzed. Unknown caller. Who is this? Langston's voice was smooth, cold. A pause. Then, Clarence spoke. The janitor. Silence stretched before Langston let out a low chuckle. You think you can touch me? I own this city. Whatever you think you have. It's already in the hands of people who hate you more than I do. Clarence cut in, his voice steady. You have 72 hours. Resign quietly. Disappear. Or the world will see who you really are. For the first time, he heard something in Langston's voice that no one ever had, fear. But Clarence wasn't done. Not yet. That night, he opened a second folder. This one wasn't about Westbridge. It was about a name buried deep in the blackmail files, a name he never expected to see. His brothers. Hand over the files, one of them growled. Marcus shifted protectively in front of Clarence. You'll have to kill us first. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. That can be arranged. Clarence's heart pounded. He clutched the box tighter, knowing these files were the only thing standing between them and death. And then, from the alley outside, came the distant wail of sirens. The agents froze. Marcus seized the distraction, grabbing an old tire iron and swinging it hard. One agent crumpled. Clarence kicked over a toolbox, sending the other agent sprawling. Come on. Marcus yelled, yanking Clarence toward the back exit. They burst out into the night, the sirens growing louder. But as they ran, Clarence knew the truth. They weren't safe. Not yet. And Judge Howard Carter wasn't done with them. Clarence and Marcus drove through the night, the weight of the stolen files pressing against them like a heavy storm cloud. Every shadow felt like an agent lurking in the dark. Marcus clutched the USB drive tightly, his knuckles pale. We need to find someone who can expose this, Clarence said, glancing in the rearview mirror for the 100th time. Someone the judge can't touch. Who do you trust? Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. Clarence thought for a moment. There was only one person who could help them, an old journalist, Vanessa Green. She had spent her career exposing corruption and had paid the price when powerful figures ruined her reputation. If anyone had the guts to take on Judge Carter, it was her. By dawn, they pulled into a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town. Vanessa lived off the grid, her paranoia born from years of being hunted by the very people she exposed. She opened the door cautiously, her sharp brown eyes scanning them. Clarence? What the hell are you doing here? We need your help, Clarence said, holding up the USB drive. We have evidence, proof of what Judge Carter's been doing. He tried to kill us for it. Vanessa stepped aside, motioning them in. You're playing with fire, she muttered, bolting the door behind them. Let me see it. Marcus handed her the drive, and she slid it into an old, untraceable laptop. As the files loaded, her face grew pale. My God, this goes deeper than I thought. Human trafficking, money laundering, and he's connected to half the city. If this gets out, he loses everything, Clarence finished. But we need to be smart. If we leak this without protection, he'll bury us. Vanessa nodded. I know someone who can help us release this safely. But it's going to take time. And you two need to disappear. Before they could respond, her phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Vanessa's face tightened as she picked up. Who is this? A cold, familiar voice filled the room. Vanessa Green. You're meddling in things beyond your reach. Walk away, before you disappear permanently. Clarence's blood ran cold. It's him, he whispered. Vanessa hung up, her face set with determination. Too late for that. We bring him down. But you two need to go underground. Now. As Clarence and Marcus slipped out the back, the black SUV from earlier crept around the corner, headlights off. The game had changed, Judge Carter knew they were alive. And now, he was coming for all of them. But Vanessa had one last card to play. She just hoped it wasn't already too late. Clarence and Marcus lay low for days, changing locations constantly. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. Judge Carter had resources, he could find them if they slipped up even once. Meanwhile, Vanessa worked tirelessly, piecing together a narrative airtight enough to destroy him. But she knew the evidence alone wasn't enough. Carter had buried scandals before. This time, they needed a public reckoning. At dawn, her contact finally called. I've secured an interview on national television. Live broadcast. They can't silence us if the whole world is watching. Clarence and Marcus arrived at the studio under the cover of darkness. The station was on high alert, anonymous threats had been pouring in since the broadcast was announced. Still, Vanessa was calm. She had survived worse. As the cameras rolled, Vanessa spoke directly to America. 4 decades, Judge Howard Carter has operated above the law. What you're about to see is proof of human trafficking, corruption, and violence. And it ends today. She played the files. Faces of missing people, bank transfers linking Carter to criminal networks, and testimonies from those too terrified to speak until now flashed across the screen. The weight of truth hung heavy. Back in his estate, Judge Carter watched, rage simmering beneath his polished exterior. He picked up his phone. "Shut it down," he growled. "We can't," his fixer stammered. "It's live everywhere. Twitter, YouTube, it's spreading like wildfire." In the studio, Clarence took a deep breath. "I was a pawn in his system. He took everything from my family. But no more. No more silence." Marcus added, voice steady despite the fear, "We're not running anymore. The truth is out, and the people will decide what happens next." By nightfall, protests erupted outside Judge Carter's mansion. News outlets worldwide picked up the story. The Department of Justice had no choice but to act. Within days, federal agents stormed his estate. Carter stood tall, his mask of dignity slipping only slightly. But as the cameras captured him in handcuffs, he finally realized, no amount of power could protect him now. In a courtroom packed with victims and their families, Clarence and Marcus sat in the front row as the judge faced the consequences of his empire of lies. The gavel fell, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa smiled softly. "The system is broken," she said, "but today, justice won." As the sun set, Clarence felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The nightmare was over. For the first time in years, he was free. But as they walked away, a black car lingered across the street. Someone else was watching. And the battle for truth was far from over. Justice may have been served, but a new shadow emerges. Who is watching Clarence and Marcus now? And what secrets remain buried? The fight isn't over yet. Let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters. This isn't the first time and it won't be the last. We have more true crime cases coming your way, cases that demand to be heard, victims whose stories cannot be forgotten. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any update. And if you found the story important, hit that like button. More people need to hear her story.